Hey team, Coach A here. This is Unit 2, Day 2, China and the World. So our due now for today is to invent a thread of history. So last class we talked about how important it is to not just think of history as a series of things that happen, but more of a series of ripples, reactions to former actions. So I used my example of how a potato chip could lead to the end of a pandemic. And now I want you guys to come up with your own thread of history. So, in a brief narrative, I want you to take a small decision and logically have it make a huge impact on the world. So, follow it through 5 major steps of one little decision changing the world. So, you'll have 10 minutes. Good luck. All right. So, what'd you write? Bet it's great. So, let's talk about one thread of history. One small decision you made. There's so many high schools here in the city of Newark that you could have chosen. You could have gone to East Side, West Side, Shabazz, Weequahic, Barringer, Arts, Technology, University, Science, so on and so forth. But you decide to come here to Newark Vocational. And I'm going to show you how that one decision you made at 13 or 14 years old could be the greatest decision you've ever made in your entire life. So, this is a retirement calculator. Deals with compound interest. And since at the end of your time here at Newark Vocational, as long as everything, all the programs that were promised come through, you'll leave with your associate's degree. And you're going to have a great paying career right out of college. So while everybody else is spending 4 years racking up student loan debt, you're going to be earning and saving. So at 19 years old, you finally have $500. You're going to put it into a retirement account. You're going to put $100 a month. That's about, if you get the average salary of the positions that you'll get out of Newark Vocational, it's about 3% of your income. So very low. And if you got the S&P average of slow growth mutual funds, 30-year return, it should be 12%. So $100 a month, $500 down. When you retire at age 65, you're going to have $2.5 million. So that is such a ripple effect because you made a decision last year. I'm going to go to Newark Vo, and it set a course of events that will enable you to retire a millionaire, where you can spoil your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, make sure that they go to great schools, and you can absolutely change your whole family tree because of one decision. And that ripple effect will be seen for generations. So as I said, it's China and the world. After reading the Qing Dynasty, the last imperial dynasty of China, 1644 to 1912, learners will be able to determine the central idea of text through 4 text-based questions, scoring 66% after revision, RH9 10.2. So, our success criterion for the day, please think about how you can summarize the various end of the Chinese dynasties. How would you compare the success of the major dynasties? And what dynasty was the most successful, and what facts would you use to support your answer? Your I can statements for the day are: I can summarize text, I can read academic text, and I can answer text-based questions. Okay, so the fall of the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty, of course, fell due to Emperor Xian not being able to keep the kingdom together as its splinters, where three powerful warlords took over their areas and then consolidated power. To the north, there was Cao Pai of the Wei kingdom. Then you have to the west Liu Bei of the Shu Han state, and then Sun Quan of the Wu state, which controlled, of course, the ocean access. So these three powerful warlords fought tooth and nail at each other until they were finally conquered by the Sioux. So this era lasts about 400 years, roughly there. So before finally Emperor Wen of the Northern Wei Kingdom was able to amass a large enough army to control South China and kick off the very brief Zhou Dynasty. The only part of the Zhou Dynasty that is worth mentioning, because we are short on time, of course, is the Grand Canal that was built in 610. It connected Beijing with Hangzhou through a man-made canal so that there was now a water route in the inland China in order to not only connect the major cities, but other waterways like the Hong here and the Jiangxi would then be able to take goods here and then send them inland. Or they could send them towards the coast and then up the Grand Canal. Then, in 610, the Tang Dynasty took over for the Zhou Dynasty, and the Tang rulers were able to control Vietnam, Korea, and Tibet as tributary states. Now, tributary states are a situation where you are a massive kingdom and you have smaller countries around you in your sphere of influence, and you allow them to remain independent as long as they send you tribute or regular payments. That's what the Tang had. So they were big, they were powerful, and then Vietnam, Korea, and Tibet, the kingdoms that were in those areas, would then send money back to the Tang. Unfortunately, a drought caused the cycle of the dynasty to wilt, and we move on to the Golden Age of China. So first off, before we can talk about the Golden Age of China, we have to ask, what is the Golden Age? So for here, I have professional wrestling, because everything's wrestling. 1988, the year Coach Hay was born, there was Ric Flair versus Lex Luger in Starrcade 88, True Grit. In WrestleMania 3, 70,000 people packed the Pontiac Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan to watch the colossal tussle between Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. And for the AWA, American Wrestling Association, I believe it was 50,000 people went to the Chicago Black Sox Kaminsky Park to watch the Texas Tornado, Kerry Von Erich, take on the King, Jerry Lawler, in a turn-away crowd. That is the Golden Era. So a Golden Era is a time specifically to a culture or civilization of, according to Merriam-Webster's, of great happiness, prosperity, and achievement. I always like where enlightenment, achievement, and or economic advancement is at its height, but splitting hairs. So that is a Golden Era, which describes the Song Dynasty. So between 960 and 1279, the Songs were truly the Golden Era of the dynasties, because they took what was great before and then tweaked it. So we see that there's rapid population growth due to the prosperity of this new type of rice growing, So you can see here, cultivation of various rivers has raised the amount of food that is being made. The amount of food goes up, population always goes up. Remember, 1850, there's 1 billion people in this world. Right now, there are over 7 billion. What changed? Planes, trains, and automobiles. We could finally take food from place A and we can move it to anywhere else. Because of that, there's more availability of food. Food doesn't go to waste. Human population boomed. So China becomes more urbanized as a country. So people live in places where there is work because they don't need to farm. That's why agriculture is so important. These new methods of agriculture are so important because less people, less of the population have to be farmers. So they can do other things, be potters, cobblers, so on and so forth. And what helps this is they invent paper money. So that first they allow special shops to issue the currency and then they take over. And this is the first time that paper money is the legal tender of a dynasty. Their only problem is invaders. So their civilian rule does create two new classes, the gentry and the merchant class. Now, the gentry are landowning scholars. So previously, your nobles mostly they owned land, they received their tribute, and lived a life of luxury. Now, under Confucian ideals, the nobles would also give way to the gentry, individuals who would take their time and their free moments to study Confucian ideas. And they would also teach people the Confucian ideas. So we start to see the professor come to light. And then we also see the merchant class. So now we have an excess of a product, let's say rice. So you, as a merchant, you have a ship. You're going to take the excess rice for the landowner. You'll go to a place that has less rice, so rice is more valuable. You'll sell it at a profit, and then the landowner will get a cut. You get a cut. It's the middleman class. Also, somewhat of the middle class, a development of middle class. We're starting to see some sort of social mobility because these merchants make enough money that they can pay the gentry to teach their kids so that their kids will become educated and they may be able to pass the civil service exams and move up in the world. So the economy grows, obviously, but land and government is no longer the only way of obtaining wealth and prestige, which is very important. It's most important to recognize that this is also the first female empress, Empress Wu. But as great as the songs were, they had one major problem looming over the horizon. Is how to stop Genghis Khan from conquering their empire. And the answer is, you can't. But we'll get to that. We'll talk about Genghis Khan. So after the Mongolian takeover of China, the Yuan Dynasty takes place for just a period under 100 years. This is during the time called Pax Mongolica, also known as Mongolian Peace. So right now we are in a time called Pax Americana. The idea of it is when you have one superpower that is so strong that nobody really wants to attack them because they'll get crushed. And you also are weary of starting any major wars or conflicts because you may be weakened, which would enable that massive superpower to then take you over in a weakened state. So this time is called Pax Mongolia. But the Mongols tolerate Chinese culture, but they make sure that they're segregated. They do not allow Chinese to be in top government positions, and they heavily encourage foreign trade and foreign merchants because they don't really trust the Chinese. So this is where the author Marco Polo comes in. He rode the Silk Road and came back to Europe and wrote all about the riches of Asia. But like every dynasty in China, we get to step 8. And in this case, step 8 comes from the fact that they were heavily taxing the Chinese citizens, as well as using Chinese slave labor to build their new roads and extend their Grand Canal. And discontent rises. And when the Black Death hits China, the bubonic plague, thousands of people are killed. And by the mandate of heaven, if you don't have the ability to protect your people and cure them, it means that you have lost the heavenly mandate. So the Red Turban rebellions break out and spread north, and the ethnic Chinese capture and kill the Mongol soldiers. One of which commanders is a peasant named Zhu Zhonghua. Now, I am butchering this, as always. I just say it confidently. So when you guys are doing your presentations, just say names real confident and let somebody else correct you. So he leads his Red Turban rebel army to overthrow the last Mongol emperor. So during his time, he expands China's influence over Korea, Mongolia, and parts of Central and Southwest Asia. So he expels the Mongols and takes the royal name of Hongwu and works to rebuild a cultural Chinese state. Reduce taxes, improves trade, agriculture, and stability. But to obtain government officials educating Confucian ideas, Hongwu installs or reinstalls the civil service examination. But with a catch, he includes censors, a position to root out people disloyal to his government. So as he expands his power greatly as an emperor, he starts to chip away at some of the bureaucrats below the emperor. So he starts to take away high-level positions and puts them under his own control. This makes Ming emperors the most powerful in the history of the Chinese dynasties. And how does he stay on top? Brutally, eliminating anyone who challenges his authority and kills thousands of his rivals. So, upon his death, his son, Yang Lo, beats out other pretenders to the throne. In 1402, he takes control of the Ming Empire. He then moves the capital to Beijing. Why? In order to build an imperial city, now known as or soon to be known as the Forbidden City, for the emperor to have a seat in. So the Forbidden City would be this vast industrial complex that would only be accessible to the most powerful in the country and enable the Ming ruler to insulate themselves from possible assassination attempts. But the problem is, when you put all of your power in one place, it's a target. So in the late 1500s, as the Ming Dynasty starts to decline and weaker rulers start to take the throne, they are still having issues trying to defend themselves against Mongolian uprisings. So the defense against the Mongolians start to drain their treasury. So, needless to say, they raise taxes on the people, and it takes one crop failure that completely blows out of the rebellion. So step 7 goes to step 8, and the Manchu, a people from northwest Manchuria, seize Beijing in 1644. The Manchu people are best known because they have the long ponytail and the Fu Manchu mustache, which was mandatory. So they do not call themselves the Manchu dynasty. Instead, they go with the Qing dynasty. And the two most prolific Qing rulers are Kangxi from 1622 or 1662 to 1722, reduced taxes, expanded the empire, and was deeply involved with intellectual pursuits, arts, and even entertained Jesuit priests at the court. Somewhat from the mold of Akbar. He enjoyed learning about European advances in science and other areas because at this time the Chinese had been so advanced from the West that they had somewhat started to rest on their laurels. And as that happens, they were starting to be overtaken by the rapidly industrializing European powers. So Kuai Long, after him, from 1736 to 1796, brought the Qing to its greatest height. Expand the empire to the largest size by conquering Taiwan, Mongolia, and Tibet. Agricultural production began to rise, thus population rose. And the economy was thriving, benefited from improved transportation, foreign and domestic markets. One of those products being opium. Opium being a very addictive drug, the British were receiving their opium from Chinese growers. So in 1793, when British Lord George Macartney came to China to discuss expanding trade, the Chinese looked at the British goods and thought them to be inferior because industrial goods were inferior to the better made, handcrafted materials that were in China at the time. But when China, starting to see the ill effects of opium, tried to crack down and ban the trade, the British went to war over the free trade. That was their justification. So with their superior navy, the British do win what is called the First Opium War and force the Chinese to sign a agreement, which is a really bad trade deal for the Chinese. But the problem is, for the British, the Chinese are making superior products. So it does not take long for there to be a trade imbalance between the British and the Chinese, even with this treaty that was supposed to be terrible for the Chinese. So more goods are going from China than to China. So what do the British do? Well, which any evil empire does. They use their evil corporation, the East India Company, to flood the Chinese market, with opium and get the Chinese people hopelessly addicted to this little drug here. So they fight a series of opium wars, China and Great Britain. But what really starts to lead to the end of the dynasty system is the Taiping Rebellion. So there's this commander called Hong Ji-wan. He is a self-proclaimed brother of Jesus Christ. His goal is to make China a nationalist Christian country, and he sought to convert the Chinese people to Christianity. So the king had to deal with this uprising called the Taiping Rebellion. And it was a bloody civil war. 20 to 30 million people die in this civil war. This is on the heels of a tremendous opium addiction. And after it, we get to the Boxer Rebellion, just kind of back to back to back, where anti-Western sentiment starts to grow, and they want to throw out the foreign interlopers, especially the Christian missionaries. So the Boxers cast out or kill the Europeans who at this time were in China. So these persistent uprisings weaken the king's power, and leads to the final overthrow of the empire, which will lead to the Chinese Republic. So, February 12th, 1912, General Yuan Shikai negotiates the abdication of Puyai, the last emperor of China, and brings an end to the dynasty. And with that, please go to NewsELA and take care of your independent practice. Remember, everybody, you will get 0 points, 0, if you do not annotate. How do you annotate? Well, you can check our YouTube tutorial on how to annotate. But blue should be author's point of view or bias. Yellow, author's claim and supporting evidence. Green should be for keywords and phrases. And red is questions you have for me about the text. So, I'll see you guys next time. Be smart, be safe. Catch you later, guys.